Hello everyone and welcome to another Elden Ring video. Today I'm going to be going over the Dragon Communion incantations because I think they work slightly differently to the other damaging incantations. In some ways I think they're better, in some ways I think they're worse, and because of that I'm going to be giving them their own tier list here. Very quickly, I do want to point out before we start that both Magma Breath and Theodorix's Magma are abusable with the follow-up attack glitch that many incantations can take advantage of. And by that I mean using Catch Flame or Bestial Sling out of a run, and then switching to either of these incantations can cast the Magma spells with the speed of either of the former incantations. This is obviously very abusable, and because with proper incantation scaling, these miracles do a significant amount of damage, you can very easily one-shot players or do significant chunks to bosses using this technique. With that being said, I don't consider that an intended interaction, and I think it has potential to be patched out of the game in the future, so I will not be rating these incantations with that in mind. However, I will recommend, if you are planning to use them, to abuse this technique as it is very powerful. One more thing I would like to mention is I'm going to be rating these slightly out of order. For the most part, when I do these tier lists, I like to just go down the miracles in the order that they appear on the screen. It kind of acts as organic timestamps for the viewer, but in this case, a lot of them are so similar, and the list is so short that I think I can rate a few of them at the same time. Starting off the list, I'm going to rate Dragonfire and Glintstone Breath together, and both of these are going to get a B. Functionally, these are the exact same spell, simply one of them does fire damage and one of them does magic damage. With the proper buffs and good incantation scaling, you can pump some good damage out of these. In my testing, I was getting anywhere from 700 to 800 depending on the equipment and the scaling of the seal I was using. The big downside to these is, first of all, they're very slow, and second of all, they can't be redirected very easily. It feels like you get maybe 60 degrees of movement from your initial cast. And as such, I feel like the best use for these incantations is in a choke, as in invading in a cave or something of that nature. I think in a duel scenario, it would be much too easy for an opponent to simply run around you and get a free counter hit off while you're locked into place. Following up with Agil's Flame and Smarg's Glintstone Breath, I'm going to give those an A over their weaker counterparts. All of the named Dragon Communion incantations, with the exception of Theodorix's Magma and Grail's Roar, can be used out of a jump, and both of these incantations exemplify that property. In a dueling scenario, that's not much of a help. However, in an invasion where there's likely to be uneven ground, or I suppose possibly if you're dueling in an area that has uneven ground, jumping off of a cliff and then using these incantations allows you to hover over the ground and spray damage down below you. In addition to being able to float, both of these incantations feature what feels like a 180-degree angle to spray their fire from. This is a sharp contrast to the first two, which feels like maybe a 60-degree angle. And on top of all of that, both of the named incantations do significantly more damage. And when I say significant, I mean to the tune of almost double, depending on the setup. The weakness to them, of course, is not only do all of these incantations cost a large amount of mana, but they are incredibly slow and lock you in place. Meaning if someone has a ranged spell or a dagger, or they can run up on you and hit you, they just get free damage. And that's going to be a consistent theme throughout the rest of these incantations. Moving on, we have Dragon Ice and the infamous Rotten Breath, which I'm going to give an A. Mechanically, these are the same as Dragonfire and Glintstone Breath. They have the same speed, they have the same 60-degree angle. The difference here is one of them inflicts Frost and the other one inflicts Scarlet Rot. Both Frost and Scarlet Rot are incredibly strong statuses in both PvE and PvP, so both of these incantations can be worth picking up for the incredibly low stat requirement of 15 Faith and 12 Arcane. In my testing, both did less damage than their fire and magic counterparts. However, the damage wasn't that much lower, and the fact that they also inflict status, in my opinion, makes them much better. The named versions of those incantations, namely Borealis' Mist and Exyke's Decay, I'm going to give an S. These have the benefits over their standard brothers in the same way that Egil's Fire and Samarig's Glintstone Breath function better than their fire and magic counterparts. They give you the same ability to hover, they do more damage, and they have a 180-degree angle with which you can spray your fumes. I'm going to go ahead and say that if you have a high level of virtual dex, whether you're using the Radagon's Seal or the Azure Glintstone Staff in the offhand, or perhaps you just have a lot of dexterity, all of the status Dragon Communion incantations are worth using. They do a significant amount of damage, the status is very powerful, and especially with the upgraded ones, it's very hard for an enemy to run around you. The only thing you have to look out for both of them is an enemy having a ranged attack to knock you out of it, or simply using them too close to the enemy and letting them hit you. Dragon Claw, I'm going to give a high A. This incantation is not incredibly fast, however it has an enormous AoE, and it does an incredible amount of damage with the correct incantation scaling. In my testing with 372 incantation scaling, this miracle was pumping out 17 to 1800 damage per strike. That is absolutely a non-trivial amount of damage. It can also be free aimed to a small extent, so if you can predict a roll, you can catch them out with the massive AoE and just absolutely chunk the enemy. In PvE, most enemies aren't going to be able to dodge this. Even if they are programmed to dodge a cast, the AoE is so incredibly large that this will probably hit them anyway for a huge chunk of their health. And on top of that, it will likely also stagger them unless they're programmed to not stagger during an attack. This also has an interesting follow-up attack mechanic, similar to the Catch Flame animation replacement that's possible, wherein instead of using the follow-up attack as intended, you can switch to a different incantation and use that one directly after the first cast of this one. Not only does this give mix-up potential in PvP, but in PvE it allows for some very devastating combos with incredible amounts of damage. Dragon Maw, on the other hand, I'm going to give a D. I think this incantation is absolutely garbage. It has very little range, it has terrible tracking, and it's the same speed, if not slower, than Dragon Claw. The only benefit to this incantation is the large amount of damage. I was able to get it to hit 2800 plus, but it was so difficult to get this incantation to land that in my opinion, it's absolutely not worth using. I feel like one roll back in PvP makes this dodge even if the roll is timed poorly. And in PvE, if you're in range to get this incantation off, whatever you're fighting is probably hitting you already. And that means your spellcast is going to be cancelled. I think this incantation sucks. Grail's Roar, on the other hand, I'm going to give an S, although below the 2 status breaths. The big downside to this incantation, aside from being relatively slow like all of the dragon incantations, is that the AoE is not huge. With that said though, the effect is very powerful, the damage is quite good, and the AoE is large enough to be usable. In PvP in particular, this incantation can hit behind, so anyone thinking they're going to get a free backstab off of you casting a dragon incantation is going to get a rude awakening. I already mentioned the damage being decent, but on top of that, this incantation also debuffs the enemies a non-trivial amount. Grail's Roar decreases attack damage by 20% and defense by 10% upon impact with an enemy. In PvE, that means that not only are you going to be more survivable against an enemy or a boss because you're debuffing their damage, but you're also going to be able to kill them more quickly because their defense is decreased. Granted, the defense decrease is not very much. 10% is minimal, on top of the fact that oftentimes 10% is not functionally 10% like it says. But because it does a decent amount of damage anyway, I still think it's worth using. Magma Breath I'm going to give a high A, and Theodorix's Magma I'm going to move to the top of S. Not only are these spells fairly quick as far as Dragon Communion incantations are concerned, not only do they do significant damage, especially Theodorix's Magma, but they also leave magma on the ground, as in the name. Functionally, in PvE, this means you get an additional 200 damage on top of the original damage. That bumps Theodorix's Magma up to 2000 plus if you're using fire damage boosting equipment. And further, on top of all of that damage, both of these incantations incantations can be chain cast. As previously mentioned, this means you can abuse the interaction between Catch Flame and other combo spells, but it also means you can layer Magma on top of Magma, and the Magma layering does stack. In PvP, this is especially interesting because being able to deny an opponent an area to dodge through or walk through can be very helpful. Free aiming this to one side and then free aiming to the other side greatly limits an opponent's ability to move and makes prediction of their next move much easier. This means that even if you miss with this incantation, you're still giving yourself a benefit because of the Magma on the ground. The one downside to these incantations is their low range and merely average AoE. All of the other Dragon Breath miracles have a higher AoE and travel much further. But with that said, the damage on this is so high and the speed is quick enough that I think it's worth using if you're using the other Dragon Communion incantations. And that is the Dragon Communion incantation tier list. I hope everybody enjoyed it. If you have any feedback or would like to start a conversation, feel free to leave a comment. I do try to respond to all of them. And if you want to see more content from me, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. My sorcery tier list just hit 1,000 views today, which is an incredible milestone for me as a new YouTuber. And it would make me incredibly happy if we could reach that milestone with another of my videos. But with that, I'm going to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see you next time.